Living in the US has become so expensive over time, right? Just take a look at turkey prices. Insane. Wait, what? This isn't the US? It's not even about turkeys? The country Turkey? Oh shit. Let's figure out what's wrong. Well, right off the bat, you can see that the money supply in Turkey has increased ninefold over the same time period. That is usually not a good sign. In fact, the money supply is still growing at a yearly rate of 65%. To compare, the equivalent number for the US has ever grown in a single year is 26.8% from the height of COVID. Things are not looking good here. So, what's with all this money creation? Some will think that the answer is obvious. The government just wants money to finance its stuff. Not quite. An interesting quirk of the modern financial system is that central banks and governments do not decide how much money is directly created. Instead, they generally set interest rates. When rates are low, people borrow a lot of money and spend it, increasing prices. When rates are high, people borrow less and save more, meaning that prices don't rise as much, if at all. So, let's take a look at Turkish interest rates. Not telling you much, is it? In fact, as far as you might think, these look pretty damn high. Rates close to 20%, never going down below 8.75, and now they're all the way up to over 40? Seems like that interest rate logic I laid out in the above paragraph is also wrong. Well, that's because it is. It's wrong because interest rates are not indicative of the stance of monetary policy. They are messed up by the effects of inflation expectations. Suppose the bank is asking you for a 10% interest rate. Is this tight monetary policy or loose? The answer is, it depends. What do you expect will happen to prices? If you expect 0% inflation, then a 10% interest rate is pretty high, and you might not want to borrow at that rate. But if you expect inflation to be 20%, then you're practically being paid to borrow money. In other words, inflation expectations matter a lot for how much people borrow money and for how inflation eventually goes. They're practically the single biggest factor behind money creation in the modern economy. Inflation expectations are the reason why an interest rate of 5.25% is considered high in the US and a rate of 100% is considered low in Argentina. Expectations, along with the nominal rate, help determine what economists call the real interest rate, the real rate that you're paying to your lenders. One particularly harsh way to calculate this number is by subtracting inflation from the nominal rate. Let's try doing this for Turkey and let's see what happens. Oh dear lord, notice how the interest rate was negative 67% at one point? This is flat out hilarious. And side note, math nerds, I know that I should not be subtracting here since the log approximation only works for small numbers, but let me have my fun, okay? So Turkey was basically paying people to borrow, and as a result, people borrowed a lot of money, making prices rise. What a surprise, right? But okay, now let's kick the can back another level. Why was Turkey going on around paying people to borrow money? Are they stupid? And the answer is no, it was just good politics. To understand, you first need to know that the president of Turkey, Erdogan, has basically been pursuing a policy of, well, becoming another sultan of the Ottoman Empire. From asking people to change the country's name internationally to speculating about bringing back the Arabic alphabet, Erdogan has been pushing an I am your Muslim savior politics for everyone to see. And though it may surprise you, interest rates were just another component of that. You see, there's a concept popular in the Muslim world that is called riba. The exact translation is a bit fuzzy, but it basically relates to paying interest, and a lot of Muslims think that's bad. This is also why Saudi Arabia has to use word tricks in its banking system. Instead of giving you a loan to buy a car, they buy you a car and ask you to pay for it in installments. And yes, that is strictly worse for you as the consumer because you can't refinance it later at a lower rate. But that's another matter. But isn't it hilarious how regulations meant to protect consumers seem to always harm them instead? Anyway, back to the scripts. Starting in 2018, as Turkey was getting used to two-digit inflation, Erdogan got up and claimed that rising prices were actually caused by high interest rates. He started pushing for state-owned banks to lower rates and subsidizing debt. As this was happening, Turkey's central bank stood its ground and raised the repo rate to 18.5%. This weird tension of high nominal interest rates paired with low commercial rates kept going until sometime in 2019 when Erdogan said screw it and replaced the central bank governor with someone who would lower rates. He would cycle central bank chiefs a couple more times until settling upon, I'm not going to try and pronounce that, who was what is sometimes referred to as a neo-Fisherian, basically an economist who believes that lowering rates leads to lower inflation. It's something like a flat earther astronomer, but oh well. Okay, side note, neo-Fisherism has some legitimate arguments, but I'm not touching upon that here. This guy kept rates lower until Erdogan's election. He had pledged that interest rates would not rise while he was in power, and as the election passed, inflation reached a yearly rate of 85%. Erdogan fired the guy and brought in a normal economist. And now Turkey has an interest rate of 40.75%. And they still have high inflation, because even 40% interest rates aren't enough when prices have been rising so rapidly. So Turkey's recent experience is a prime lesson in the conduct of monetary policy. Past mistakes beget future mistakes. If you are unwilling to maintain high rates today, inflation will run off into insanity, and then you'll find yourself having to keep rates even higher for longer, screwing over everyone else just because you wanted to pretend to be a sultan.